what I want to bring to the table first is, who are these guys? And so who am I? I'm a psychologist, and as you might imagine, in my training as a psychologist, I did psychological testing. And all the testing that I did, testing training in graduate school, as I think is true for almost all psychologists, is essentially pathology-oriented. So among other instruments, I'm familiar with the MMPI and a variety of the Milan and other instruments that look at what's wrong with people. That worked for a while in my practice, but I had a very defining moment with a patient a number of years ago, because I had kind of fallen in love with the MMPI and other sorts of pathology-based instruments, and assumed, wrongly, but assumed that this is the best way to identify what a person is. So, for instance, I had this young man that I saw, and I had recently read Horney's Tyranny of the Should. Any of you familiar with that? Quite a good little piece of work that she did. And gave that to him, along with some other writings. And he came back the next week and threw the book on the floor and said, I have two things to say. Everything she says about me is right, and I feel worse. It struck me. I thought, how can you feel worse? And because Horney herself says, when asked, and she says sort of rhetorically, well, no, I have told you what is potentially wrong, and how is that going to help people? And she just kind of simply says, well, it will. It will help you to understand what's wrong. So I took a step back from them and began to look at other sorts of instruments, and I looked at the Edwards and a variety of California psychological inventory, other instruments that began to look at personality traits. And a therapist that was working for me at the time introduced me to the Myers-Briggs. And that opened up a whole new field of understanding of what people are and what they bring to the table. As most of you probably are familiar with the MBTI or similar instruments, it is not pathology at all. It is not what is wrong with people, it is what's right with people. And those of you who might be familiar with it, there's a movement now about 10 years old, started primarily by Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi, which is referred to as positive psychology. Now, positive psychology, from their perspective and others, is significantly different from what we're doing. They're really looking at character strengths, which I think is very valuable. But frankly, I think positive psychology is looking at the whole realm of who we are as people, including personality type, to look first at what's right with people. So my perspective has come over the years that the pathologies that we have are a strength to a fault. And you'll see that through some of what I have here in the PowerPoint. You'll see that terminology, a strength to a fault. As Boris and I went through this briefly, he and I were looking at strengths and then strengths to a fault. The strength of the extrovert going and seeing what we have in the castle, the strength. The deflation afterwards is a fault, likewise with the introvert. So that's a little bit what we're going to look at. I would ask you, back to, if you can, Boris, the first page here. I'd ask you to look at yourself as we go through today, because that will be most helpful. We are always projecting. We are always in transference. We are always in countertransference. So ask yourself, how do you feel? How do you think? What do you think? What do you feel about Boris? What do you think? What do you feel about me? Are you bored? Are you excited? Those all are extremely important. That's really the substance of what we want to present to you today, not just information, which is the essence of the data, but the real essence is the essence inside of you of how you interact